Thanks, Tom. So, following on from the work that Sam's done and also the introduction that Tom's given, I'm just going to give a bit of a rundown of the Storage Integrity Working Group that we're running at the Clean Energy Council. So, Tom's given me a pretty good lead-in. In terms of our roadmap, we sort of sit around number 2 of the roadmap here. So, to give you a little bit of background, in June of 2014, we had a workshop at the Clean Energy Council to try and investigate what things we needed to do to ensure industry integrity in this storage industry. So at that workshop we had representatives from Standards Australia, also some committee members from Standards Australia, CSIRO, the Australian Battery Recycling Initiative, obviously people from Clean Energy Council as well as a number of our members. So what came out of that was there was 6 key areas that we needed to investigate. So obviously there's the product standards, and again you can see from Sam's report that that was one of the key findings in his report. Installation standards, trade accreditation, installation tracking, product recycling, and also the stewardship. And one that sort of came a little bit later on was around transportation of storage technologies. And just to give you an overview, the people that are involved in the Storage Integrity Working Group are obviously key CEC members, but we also have input from CSIRO, some government bodies. We also have some testing houses, private certifiers, as well as other members in this area. So around product standards, similar to some of the work that Sam's done, we've tried to look at what other standards are available around the world. And try and identify what's missing, or more so what's not appropriate for Australia. Sam mentioned, and I think the person who asked the question about what technology should I have, and Sam's first response is where's it going to be installed. Australia is quite unique in its environment, so we need to ensure that although a product meets a standard, we need to make sure the tests within that standard are appropriate for Australia. So there's a fair bit of work going along in that area. The other one which we're heavily involved in as well is around the installation standards. So our first attempt at that was to gather all the all the Australian standards that are associated with battery storage and try to put them into one place. So there's a number of standards already available in Australia, although they're outdated. I think they date back to sort of 1992. But to try to find those specific requirements and get them into some form of industry guide to provide information to the industry. So we created our installation guidelines. They came out in May this year. They were out for comment. They were a draft because it was work to try and get something out to the industry initially. So we've collated all the feedback from that, and we're in the process of getting the second revision of that out. The guidelines are also being developed in line with some of the work that's going on within the standards project as well. So there is an Australian standard being developed for energy storage, which is 5139, so of which I'm heavily involved in as well. The next is around accreditation. So as has been discussed, there was a gap within accreditation. What our stopgap, I guess, was within our installation guidelines for solar PV, was we put a requirement in those guidelines that if you want to install PV as well as battery storage, you needed not only to have the Grid Connect accreditation, but the standalone accreditation. And the reason being is the Grid Connect accreditation doesn't cover the safety risks that are associated with batteries, whereas the standalone accreditation does. So we were able to combine those two. At the same time, the training organisation, so EOS, were developing training packages for Grid Connect with battery storage. Unfortunately, there's some issues around that process and it was delayed. So what we ended up choosing to do was the nationally accredited modules for Grid Connect with battery storage unfortunately haven't been moved into a nationally recognised or endorsed course yet. But because there was a need within the industry to ensure that we have the right training for installers and designers, we are accepting people who have done the draft modules and have trained in the draft modules to then become accredited with that endorsement on their Grid Connect accreditation. So just to give you an idea, there's only 10 installers who have that additional endorsement. Bear in mind, I think there's only been 3 courses run so far, but I would imagine that they'll be going quite strong from here. There's currently, as what we know of, 4 RTOs training, so I think there's a couple here in New South Wales. 3 of them I think are in New South Wales. 1 who's sort of floating around as well, or also TAFE SA. Onto tracking. So one of the important things that came out of the workshop is actually understanding where this technology is, what type of technology is there, and how much of it's there. One of the issues I guess we're coming across is there's shared benefits in that knowledge, so be it the emergency services, be it the grid, be it homeowners, be it whoever. But what we've done is we've investigated a method of actually trying to build up some form of database. So if I'm not too sure how many people are aware, but we built an app for testing and commissioning of PV systems. So an installer at the end of the job can use our app, log all the details, and it actually saves it on their part of the website so they can come back. So I guess our nirvana would be to have that extended to battery storage so that then that information is captured. And that's helpful as well around maintenance, making sure that the maintenance is kept up, and obviously the stuff that's from the CSIRO report, the maintenance of energy storage is extremely important. Recycling and product stewardship. This was one of our key things right from the get-go. We have a concern from an industry integrity point of view that today's energy storage could end up looking like the big screen TVs, where someone's 5-year-old lead-acid battery system that was pretty cool now is being replaced by this tiny little box that's all nice and fancy, and so they just put it out on the nature strip. So we have a major concern with that. So we've been working with the Australian Battery Recycling Initiative to try to get some best practice guides around recycling. And the last initiative that came in was around transportation. So the transportation network is pretty well known from manufacturing to the place of distribution, but from distribution actually to the installer, or from the installers to the actual homeowners, there is a gap in that area. So we have a team that's working on that to develop best practice guidelines for that last transportation area. Obviously, the Clean Energy Council is a not-for-profit membership-based organisation, so we have a number of members on board who have been helping us with this. So this is just to give a plug to them and to thanks to those people who are with it. But also, we're always open to having other people come on board. So if you want to discuss membership, you can talk to us, as well as the work that we're doing in this space. So we do the website. We have information on. We also have a dedicated email address, so if you want to know more work or more information about the work that we're doing in storage, please email through that and someone will be in touch. And that's it officially for me, Tom.
Right, that'll be a quick overview of what's been a very extensive work program for the last 6 months or so. Any questions from the audience?
Thomas Leanface. Your transport track, does that also consider the storage of inventory?
It wasn't initially of the group that we've started with. It was more about the transportation, but I'll take that on board. I think that's an important one for us to consider. Thanks.
Sandy, in the solar industry, one of the biggest challenges, if I'm not mistaken, has not so much been around the development of standards and regulations around installation compliance and everything else. It's been the enforcement of that and what you actually do, and how do you get up the value chain so that you stop things from doing the wrong thing. Has there been any consideration in your roadmap work about the enforcement side of things and catching these problems earlier in the process?
Definitely, that has been a key discussion. I wish I had an answer for you at the moment. We don't have an answer. we were very lucky, I guess, with the solar space where there was a government incentive, and therefore that built the database and the requirements, and being able to have guidelines that could change quickly to address issues were really helpful for us. We haven't found a direct way in storage yet. I guess our concern is, certainly from an industry integrity point of view, is that we want to ensure the installation is, the methods are safe, done safely, and the products are done safely. So if we can build those things in a similar way that happened with the accreditation scheme prior, that then if there's some way of tying it in, then there's something already there available. So we're sort of, I don't know if you're putting the horse before the cart, whichever way you want to look at it. We're trying to build that first, so then we can point to it. But certainly open to any suggestions of any way that you can think we could improve it or increase that requirement. Because that is a concern, without a doubt, that you put these things in place for the people who want to do the right things, and if there's not a hook or a requirement.
Right, any other questions? Quite
Yeah.
lovely there, Sandy.
I know. Happy to talk about any of this afterwards anyway, so thank you. Thanks, Doc.
All right, thanks, Sandy, again. So I think one of the questions earlier was around whether we can keep up with technology and technology changes, and I think the recycling part of the work is one key area there, where during CSIRO's work, the opportunities to recycle different technologies has changed quite dramatically over the last 6 months. So that's one area. The other one is deployment rates are going out and technology is changing very quickly. So the real question, though, is whether we can create the right frameworks to enable an industry to have the right integrity frameworks, to enable technology advancements within that framework. So it's not about trying to limit technology changes, it's about getting everything in place to enable the safe deployment of these systems. So, can we keep up with everything? Well, we're certainly trying, as you've seen from the CSIRO's work and Sandy's work. We're definitely trying to stay ahead of the curve, but there's always more we can do, and we're at a point now where we're really able to flesh out what the next steps are and how we move forward. So there's 5, and I'm just going to talk on these, and then we'll have some more questions, and really I'm standing in the way of drinks at the moment, so I'll try and move through this quickly. So the 5 key areas really are around industry integrity and safety, consumer information, unlocking the value of energy storage, and supportive regulation, and learning through government support and demonstration. A bit differently to renewable energies and the deployment of solar, really storage is going to be a consumer-driven change, we think, given tariff changes, price curve decreases, and the way things are moving pretty quickly, and feed-in tariffs falling away as well. So around industry integrity and safety, we've seen that our installations are not zero risk. But consumers need to have confidence in the performance, quality and safety of their investments. 3 of those key areas are around product standards for Australian conditions, and that aligns with CSIRO's recommendations. Installer design and training and accreditation and enforcement, which we were just talking about, and the establishment of some kind of enforcement regime for accreditation, which does not exist at this point in time. And then there's the ongoing life cycle considerations around maintenance and transport. Transport's probably early in the life cycle, but maintenance and fault management and recycling, and making sure all those arrangements are in place and accessible more widely to consumers. And the consumer information, every consumer is unique. I think Sam's answer to the question earlier around where the installation was going in is a good example of that. The same thing, the other variables are what the consumer's got at their house. Have they got a PV system? Are they just putting the storage in to arbitrage their tariff, or deflect peak charges or whatever? So they need to have information to inform those decisions. At the moment, there's not really anything out there, and you're relying on a supplier to tell you what battery to buy. So the third component is really around the full value of storage, and this is very much more a policy and regulatory kind of space around tariffs and allowing consumers to actually derive value from their investments. So ensuring that tariff structures and the way that tariffs change actually enable that, and enables consumer response to do what the tariffs actually driving them to do, is use less power during peak periods, basically. So it's important that reform of tariffs don't create barriers or remove barriers to storage deployment, and enable that consumer empowerment with these new technologies as well. The fourth step's around regulation, and we've heard about building codes and planning regimes, fire safety, etc. So the regulations need to enable that deployment rather than create barriers to the deployment. And installer accreditation and training, of course, falls in that bucket as well. And the last one is around government-supported demonstration projects, and this is really about trying to test those parameters and trying to test the regulation and test the standards and make sure that the deployment is actually happening. To give that feedback. To make sure that the frameworks are actually delivering what they're meant to. So to give that feedback to industry and government to make sure that we're actually getting what we want out of the integrity framework, and that the systems are being deployed safely and with the right integrity framework. So the second last slide. In summary, the markets are evolving. In the next couple of years, we're going to see some pretty drastic changes, and those changes all work in the favour of storage deployment. So 2 to 5 years is probably a decent window to think that there will be very large numbers of storage systems out there. Whether it'll be en masse like PV is, who knows, but probably 2 to 5 years is a window where this is going to happen. This is a capacity building opportunity for Australia, and should be viewed that way from a government perspective. It's about building experience that we can actually take overseas as industries, electricity industries, transform in other sectors, because it's not just in Australia where we're seeing very large numbers of PV systems deployed. So we expect other countries to pick up speed. And for those of you who were at the Australian Utility Conference yesterday, one of the guys from PG&E in the US talked about having 125,000 PV systems out there in the field, and they've got 5 million customers, which you compare to Australian conditions, and we're leaps and bounds ahead of that. So this is an opportunity for Australia, and it should be viewed that way by government and policymakers. So we're clearly working alongside industry. We're trying to do the best we can to keep up with everything and get everything in place, and we really feel that storage is an opportunity for Australia, and we want to take part in that. So there's a role for government as well, though. Government needs to be aware of all these changes and what's happening in the industry, and get the right frameworks in place to allow these technologies to empower consumers, basically. And it's pretty heartening to see that the ACT government, alongside a few other state governments, called a meeting earlier this week, and Sandy was there, Darren from the CSC was there, Sam was presenting there as well. So they're very aware of the storage and some of the challenges that are out there, and are trying to stay ahead of the curve there as well, which is really good to see. All right, well, that's it from me. Maybe we'll take 5 minutes for questions to the CSC or CSIRO or anyone else in the room, or we can just go straight to drinks now. But I believe that after that, drinks will be served downstairs as well. So.
Can I just make a comment as well too about that? Last thing is that overseas, especially in the US, they're actually looking at Australia at what we're going to do, mainly because we have high penetration of PV. And obviously we have a very unique market as well. So they're actually looking at us for guidance in some way. So it's a really unique opportunity for us to be world leaders in this space as well. So just a comment.
motorcycles with lithium batteries. There's a growing number of other vehicles with lithium batteries. So there's a whole lot of lithium batteries already out there, all in principle exactly the same with charges and discharge cycles. And surely there is a role to play for other industries that are already using lithium batteries in a similar situation to what we'll be using to contribute to this process, firstly. And secondly, there's surely a whole lot of work that's been done around this to evaluate these risks that we don't need to redo, right?
Do you want to make a comment?
Probably being the research
Yeah, right, okay.
expert. Yeah.
I guess the point is that I can go out and buy an 85 kilowatt hour battery tomorrow if I've got 120 grand parked in my garage, and that's a whole lot more risk than, adding 5 kilowatt hours of storage to my solar system. And there's no regulation that applies to me buying a Tesla except money.
Exactly.
So, are we at risk of, being way too conservative and way too risk averse on this? Notwithstanding that I accept there's risks, but surely there's a middle ground there somewhere.
Can I say just a comment on that? At the moment, it's very hard to evaluate what the risk is because, especially in the storage system space or product space, we don't really know when we install these things on the side of the house how it's going to work. We also don't know in the EV market exactly the same thing as well too. There's very small number of these systems that are actually out there. I mean, we've got plenty of Priuses. When I was in Newcastle, I actually saw half a Prius, just the front end of it, just being welded because it just arced an electronic somewhere. At the moment, there's very little data to actually make a really solid conclusion about some of that stuff you're just talking about. So it's just my thoughts.
I'll
Add a comment.
I think it's a good point, and the purpose of this study was to do an assessment, and perhaps some of those industries haven't undertaken those assessments. I think from our perspective, we hold ourselves to a high level of accountability. I think that's certainly what we did. There were some lessons learnt in the solar sector, and I guess this study was for us to try and evaluate what some of those risks were, but more importantly, where some of the gaps are. And that's not to say there shouldn't be the mass deployment of battery storage technology, but to give us some pointers and directions as to where the areas are that we should focus on, where the gaps are that we need to fill, and again hold ourselves to a high level of accountability so that we can essentially protect the integrity of the sector and be proud of what I think will be very high levels of deployment and a very successful industry down the track.
Yeah, I'll maybe just build on that for a second, and I think the research was showing that even in the aviation and marine sectors that are well advanced, there's still large gaps. So I think the tracking of incidents is probably coming from the marine or the aviation sector,
Yes.
Sam, and there's information there, but even that's quite grey at times. So there's really an opportunity to get in front here and make sure that we're getting on top of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, we looked at FAA databases and what they've recording of just mobile phones and laptops and stuff, just burning on their planes and everything like that. And there's still gaps in their particular system, so they're still trying to grapple with it. I know that the CASA are also grappling with it as well about how they actually, log those sort of incidents as well in Australia. So it's not us, just it's all across the whole space, really.
Okay, I think there's a question down the middle here.
Tyson Bourne, Office Environment Heritage, New South Wales. Just on the first point that we're talking about empowering consumers to become active participants in energy systems. Has the research looked at the interaction between sort of how to educate consumers as well as the role regulation plays in them making decisions or optimal decisions about batteries?
Optimal decisions in terms of the type
What's
of...
the best thing for them? So
Yeah.
we're talking about, some products are probably not appropriate if it's not going to be shaded and if it's out in the open, and other products are there in other circumstances.
Yep.
Does it look at, I know that you've made the recommendation that we need to educate consumers, but does it look at sort of to what level we need to do that and what point regulation steps in and who's going to do that education?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's to the extent of this scope of work, we had the consumer guide component, and that went through, I think, 3 or 4 iterations before we ended up with what we got on our website. So the angle we took there was very much around the safety aspect, and I know that the CSIRO guys through their focus groups came up against a bit of a wall as soon as they mentioned that there was risk. You know, consumers were almost switching off and saying, whoa, this is, I'm out, like, I don't want to know about it anymore. You know, as soon as you start talking about any of the details. So we've gone to the best we can to try and get enough information in there for them to make decisions. But the next level is really around what would, you know, what kind of information do they need to make decisions on the commercial opportunity or the economic opportunities they have, and, you know, what kind of system they should purchase if they've got a PV system, or what kind of tariff they're on, or the location, etc. And so we didn't delve into that level of detail in this work, and that's really the next step we see, is that kind of information portal to enable those decisions, the economic decisions for those particular consumers, is really the next step, and that was one of the points I was making in the summary there. But yeah.
I think some of the demonstration projects going on around the country at the moment, and some of the things that ARENA are involved in, I think are helping to test how consumers think about storage, how do they take it up, how do they use it, how do they respond to different signals. And so I think it's very much I think this is the phase we're in. It's a bit of a learning phase to understand what works, what doesn't, what sort of information will help consumers, how industry needs to bundle and package products up, what effect, and I know it's an area that CSIRO have worked in, but what effect different tariff arrangements have on the business case for storage, etc. So it feels like we're really in that phase at the moment, and over time, I think we'll all, a bit like PV probably 5 or 10 years ago, as time goes on, I think all of that will evolve, and there'll be a clearer sort of package offering. We'll have a clearer sense of what consumers need and how they respond to different information and different packaging and solutions.
Can I just take a bit of a comment? So CSIRO actually did some work for AMC, and we actually looked at some of those different the value chains across the whole of the network. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that, and it looks at those particular things that you're talking about with regards to costs and everything. The other thing too is we actually did use social scientists to go out there and actually talk to the focus groups, and also the other people as well too. So we also used them to try and work out what people were thinking. Like Tom sort of said, you know, as soon as we mentioned risk, they got a bit defensive about it. But we did say, look, you know, if you look at your car, it's got a petrol tank, you know, it does have some sort of inherent risk, or your barbecue, all that sort of stuff. And then they realised, oh, okay, well maybe it isn't, not, you know, it's not a big risk after all. But yeah, that was some of the stuff that we did as part of the project. So just comment.
Ian Maitland from Ethnic Communities Council. I'll be interested to see the work done on focus groups, because it's our experience that largely when you go out to consumers and you have focus groups, if you don't include the 25% of the population of Australia whose first language is not English, you're missing a quarter of the population of Australia. And our experience has been that they have very different needs about education, communication and empowerment, very different processes to what you might expect from English-speaking customers. I'll be interested to see the sort of, I guess, the breakdown of who was focused on.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, that work at the moment is not published, I don't think. It's
It's not published, but we are in the process of publishing that, hopefully.
There you go. I mean, that's another aspect to communication which we hadn't considered. So.
I'll send you my guide.
I guess you all touched on a consumer-led business model, and also the other potential business models which involve with applications. The AMC is doing the review now on what the regulatory framework should be.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, they should have something out before Christmas. That's what I was told.
All right. Okay.
3rd December. There's short. He'll tell you exactly. So talk to.
I guess I was just wondering if you guys either had institutional or personal views on how that framework should work out.
Yeah, we've certainly got a strong view. I think our submission was 30 pages, something thereabouts in length, so we've got some pretty strong
I'm not sure if it's quite that long.
Oh, I thought it was long.
Probably about 5 or 6 pages.
Oh, confusing submissions.
Yeah, I think so.
Strong points there, weren't there?
Look, I mean, there's a number of. I'm surprised that the AMC can turn around that paper in the 3rd of December. I think Stuart just said, and considering the extent of the considerations in their initial documentation, you know, it was basically everything from grid connection process for households and commercial scale PV and storage or whatever, through to how it interacts with the market and market aggregators. It was every facet of the market. So I assume no one commented on most of the questions. But I mean, our view was really that we supported the AEMC's view that storage should be contestable, first and foremost, that consumers should be able to invest in a system, and if a network wants to put in a system, then they should do that through a ring-fenced entity, and you know, they should not be able to, I guess, monopolise into that space. That was one of the views we put forward. Another one was that going forward, and the AMC expressed some concern around control of inverter-based energy systems, which also relates to new inverters and going in for PV systems. And one of the concerns they raised was enabling a DNSP to have control of that system without any kind of regulatory oversight at all. And our view was that if a DNSP wants to control a PV system or a storage system, then there has to be a contract in place to enable some kind of economic arrangement, because otherwise, I mean, the DNSPs have a lot of sway over connection requirements and what is connected to their system. So to have a standard or requirement without any kind of compensation arrangement, then, you know, is a concern for us. There's 2 ways that could work. One is a standing offer that the AER approves. The other one is which I think is a little bit less desirable from a network perspective, is to have a system whereby if they activate a demand response mode, then they have to compensate the customer for any network charges that are received during that period, basically. And the third part is around ring fencing and what appropriate ring fencing looks like, and that's a really big question at the moment, considering the capacity for networks to move into the contestable arrangement through another entity, and the quasi-regulatory role they have with assessing and approving a connection. You know, and that's a big piece of work I think the AER's got next year on their ring fencing review.
Any other final questions or comments? No,
Okay.
I think everyone's ready for
Bit thirsty.
downstairs. Maybe can I just thank firstly each of you for coming along and sharing your time, your perspectives. I expect we'll continue the conversation downstairs. Can I thank Arena and Danny for their support for this project and this sector, and Sam and CSIRO and Tom and Sandy for their leadership on this work. So please